Chapter 5. The Girl Who Does Not Remember. She came to with her cheek pressed against cold metal and the taste of stratospheric grit on her tongue. The room was small. That was the first thing she understood, not from seeing it but from feeling it. The way the air sat still and compressed around her like a fist half closed. No windows, no crack of violet sky. The ceiling was maybe a meter above her head when she pushed herself upright, and the walls were smooth alloy the color of old teeth. Her wrists were free. That surprised her. Then she heard it. A low hum, below the threshold of hearing, more felt than listened to. She knew it the way Jem knew oncoming weather, in the bones before the brain. The sound sat behind her molars and in the hollow behind her eyes. It was the kind of sound that made you forget what you'd been about to think. Silence drones. She'd heard older scavengers talk about them in the shanty run under Kalora's east lip, trading horror stories over cold broth. The unburdened used them for interrogation, for meditation, for whatever they called the thing they did to people who asked too many questions. The drones didn't cause pain. They were worse than pain. They went in soft, like a thumb pressing against a bruise, finding all the places where memory lived and pressing, until the edges blurred. Myra stood up. The floor tilted slightly, gravity still finding its settling point from whatever transport had brought her here. She planted her feet wide and breathed through her nose. The hum deepened. She felt her name start to go loose in her mind, like a knot being worked open. Myra, Myra. She held it deliberately. Two enforcers stood at the single door, both broad-shouldered, faces obscured behind smooth black masks that curved from forehead to chin. They weren't watching her the way guards usually watched someone, with boredom or cruelty or the restless shuffle of people who'd rather be somewhere else. They stood completely still, arms at their sides. The masks had no eye holes. Sensory filters, probably, so the drones didn't eat their own thoughts while they waited.
"Where am I?"
Myra said. Her voice came out raspy, smaller than she meant it to. Neither enforcer answered. Maybe they couldn't hear her through the filters. Maybe they didn't need to. This wasn't about conversation. The hum shifted pitch, climbing half a step, and something in her chest went briefly hollow. Like the space between words when you've lost the sentence you were building. Like reaching for Jem's name and finding a gap where it should be. Jem. She clamped onto that. His name. His face, the gap in his front teeth from where he'd hit the iron railing of their shelter last winter. The way he smelled of copper dust and something sweeter underneath. The way he said her name when he was scared. 2 flat syllables, Mira, nothing fancy, just the plain fact of her. The hum pressed. Myra pushed back. Not with her hands, not with her voice. Just held the shape of him like cupping water. A vent near the ceiling exhaled a soft pulse of cooler air, and she felt the drone frequency riding in it. They were coming through the ventilation system. Smart. Nowhere to run from air. She pulled her jacket up over her nose and mouth, knowing it wouldn't help, knowing she did it anyway because bodies needed something to do when minds were under siege. Time started behaving strangely. She didn't know if she'd been standing for 3 minutes or 30. The light in the room didn't change, a flat gray that came from nowhere specific, sourceless and indifferent. Her shadow fell in 3 directions at once under that non-light, and she watched the middle shadow, the strongest one, and counted her own heartbeats to hold herself to the passing of seconds. 43, 44, 45. The enforcers hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. One of them tilted their head very slightly as if receiving a signal. The hum doubled. It wasn't a sound anymore. It was a pressure, a wall of it coming from every surface at once, the walls, the floor, the ceiling that crouched too close. Myra's knees buckled and she caught herself with one hand on the floor and the contact burned cold. Her thoughts went ragged at the edges. She forgot her own age for a moment. 17. She forgot the name of the island she slept on. Kalora. She forgot how she'd gotten here, and that one was dangerous because without the story of how she arrived there was no map to how she might leave. The gold crystal. The enforcers catching her on the west climb. The man with the bruised knuckles dragging her down through a hatch she'd never seen before, down through layers of the undercity she'd never mapped, into this room, into this hum. She rebuilt it piece by piece, like picking splinters off a floor.
"Stop it,"
she said, though there was no one to stop anything. Her voice echoed too close, swallowed by the alloy walls.
"Stop."
One enforcer stepped forward. He crouched to her level, mask tilted at an angle that might have been clinical curiosity. He set something on the floor between them, a flat disc, silver about the width of her palm. A resonator, personal unit, not just the vents. They were turning it up. She had maybe seconds before her name stopped meaning anything. Jem had asked her once, when he was small and bad from a memory bleed, if forgetting hurt. She told him no because she hadn't known. She knew now. It didn't hurt like a cut or a burn. It hurt like standing in a room where all the furniture had been removed and trying to remember how you used to move through it. All the space was wrong. You kept almost reaching for things that weren't there anymore. The disc on the floor pulsed. The air between her eyes went thick. She pulled her knees to her chest and dropped her forehead against them and breathed in the smell still caught in her jacket collar. Salt from the cloud level, rust from the underbelly cables, the sour sweet of the broth she'd had that morning. She followed each smell like a thread. Salt, the cloud level, the feeling of cold mist on bare arms, the weight of the satchel when it was full, her body knowing the angle of the cables before her eyes did. Rust, the squeal of the grip, her palms hard and calloused, the particular way her left shoulder ached on cold days from the fall 2 years ago. Broth, Jem ladling it out with the cracked spoon, spilling a little because he always spilled a little. The hum pressed and pressed. She pressed back with smell and texture and heartbeat. She pressed back with the memory of a lullaby their mother used to sing, not the words because the words had gone long before the silence drones could take them, but the shape of it, the melody's rise and fall. She started to hum it under her breath, very low, just enough for her own chest to feel it. The enforcer with the disc straightened. He exchanged a look with the one at the door, though with the masks it was more a turning of heads, a wordless adjustment. The resonator disc blinked twice, and the pulse from it changed frequency, searching, tuning. She kept humming. The melody moved through her ribcage, and she felt it the way she felt her own resonance sometimes. Not a sound exactly, more a fact, a physical certainty. I am here, I am still here, I have a name and a brother and a route home. The disc blinked out. Not gone. She could still feel the vents, still feel the pressure. But the personal unit had failed to lock. The enforcer crouched again, picked it up, turned it over in his hands. His stillness broke into something less practiced, a stiffness in the shoulders, the small betrayal of uncertainty. Myra didn't move. She kept humming, eyes closed, forehead on her knees. Her name sat in her chest, whole and unworked, Myra, Mira, 2 plain syllables. Her brother's gap-toothed face. The smell of cloud salt. The particular weight of a full satchel. The melody that had no words left but didn't need them. The room still pressed. The hum still droned. But underneath it, quieter and more stubborn than any machine, something held. The door opened. Not the way doors opened when guards came through, quick and functional, a job to be done. This one opened slowly, like whoever was on the other side knew the room would rearrange itself around their entrance. A considered thing. The hum dropped out of the air so completely that Myra's ears rang in the sudden quiet. The enforcer with the failed disc stepped back without being told. Both of them moved to the walls, shoulders flat against the alloy, and became furniture. The man who walked in was not what she'd expected. She had a picture of Curran in her head assembled from scavenger gossip and undercity whispers. Enormous, probably, in the way that leaders of frightening things were supposed to be enormous, with a face designed to make you feel like a child who'd wandered somewhere adult. But he was only a little taller than her, lean in the way people got lean when they forgot meals, dressed in clothes that were good once and had since been worn down to something honest. His hair was dark and pulled back. His eyes were the particular gray of the sky at altitude, the color of nothing and everything at once. He looked at her the way doctors looked at things they'd already diagnosed.
You didn't lose anything.
He said, not a question. He crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched in front of her, close enough that she could smell him. Something mineral, like the inside of a silo, and under it something else, green, like things still growing.
The disc should have found purchase in...
Myra lifted her head from her knees. Her neck ached.
Maybe your disc is broken.
Maybe.
He didn't look at the disc. He kept looking at her.
What were you humming?
She said nothing.
It doesn't matter.
He straightened, moved toward the far wall where a narrow shelf she hadn't noticed held a row of small containers, opaque and sealed. His back was to her, but not in the careless way of someone who'd forgotten she was there. In the careful way of someone who wanted her to think he had.
You were on the west climb, alone. That tells me you weren't working with a crew.
I work alone.
Scavengers don't usually work alone. The gravity eddies.
I'm careful.
You were caught.
He said, without particular judgment.
Everybody gets caught once.
He turned around then, and she saw what he was holding. A small case, dark alloy, the kind built to maintain temperature. The kind she'd seen medical haulers use on Kalora when they moved delicate biologics. He carried it the way you carried something you'd already decided the worth of. He set it on the floor between them, equidistant, the way the enforcer had placed the resonator disc. She noticed that, the deliberate distance. Give her the illusion of the thing being neutral territory. She didn't reach for it.
I know what you are.
He said. He lowered himself to sit cross-legged, which surprised her, because it was a thing you did when you wanted to look unthreatening, and either he didn't care that she saw the calculation or he'd done it so long it had become genuine. She couldn't tell which was worse.
Resonant without reliving. You touch a crystal, and you read its signature without being pulled inside. You feel the emotion of it without experiencing the memory.
Her stomach tightened. The two enforcers hadn't moved.
You're guessing.
She said.
The disk would have locked onto your recall patterns within a minute and a half. The drones would have found the seams between your memories and started separating them. Every person in this building, given enough time, starts to unravel.
He tilted his head.
You didn't unravel. You hummed a song. The disc couldn't find you because you weren't reliving anything. You were just present, just vibrating at whatever frequency you actually are.
He said it calmly, like a man reading a readout.
That's a very rare thing.
She kept her face still. Jem had always said she was good at that, at making her face into a wall when she needed it to be. She needed it now.
What do you want?
She said. He opened the case. The crystal inside was smaller than she expected given what the enforcers had made of catching her with one like it. Maybe 2 centimeters across, faceted irregularly, not manufactured but grown, the way real memory crystals grew when they formed naturally in a person over years. Its color was gold. Not bright gold, not the flat gold of coin metal, but the deep warm gold of late afternoon light through water, the kind of color that made you feel something before you understood what you were feeling. It wasn't glowing, but it was warm. She could feel the warmth from here.
I want you to tell me what's inside it.
Curran said. She looked at the crystal and then looked at him.
You don't need me for that. Any memonologist can read a crystal.
Any mnemonologist would be pulled into the memory and drown in it.
He said.
This one is.
He paused, and the pause was different from his other pauses. Something worked behind his face that he didn't quite contain.
Fragmented. It's not a single memory. It's a distributed consciousness. Partial. Every trained reader I've sent in has come out non-functional for days. One is still in medical.
He looked at the crystal with something she couldn't name. Not love exactly. Not guilt exactly. Something with the weight of both.
I need someone who can touch the surface without being consumed by it.
Myra looked at the crystal again. She didn't want to. She understood with the animal part of her brain, the part that counted exits and tracked the position of threats, that wanting to was the danger. Curran knew she wanted to. He'd built this whole room to arrive at this moment. And still, the warmth of it reached her like the warmth of a coal through a cupped hand, gentle and even and persistent. She'd held hundreds of crystals in her scavenging years. Cold ones that burned with old rage. Blue-white ones that trembled with grief so refined it had become almost mathematical. Green ones dense with the compressed specific joy of a particular afternoon in a particular life. She'd learned to read their temperatures the way weather readers learned clouds. This one felt like none of them. This one felt like a person trying very hard to still be here.
What is it?
She said, and her voice came out quieter than she meant.
I don't know everything.
Curran said.
Some of what's inside is beyond my ability to access. That's why you're here.
He reached out and pushed the case half a centimeter closer to her. The motion was small and inexorable.
I just need to know if she's intact enough. If there's enough coherence left to matter.
Myra heard that word land and felt the hair on her arms lift.
I'm not going to help you.
She said, but she was already looking at the crystal again. She couldn't stop looking at it.
You're afraid of what it might tell you.
Curran said, not unkindly.
I'm not afraid of anything in a crystal.
Not about the crystal.
He waited.
About yourself.
She pulled her eyes to his face. His expression was composed, quiet, and it made her feel like the room was smaller than it had been a moment ago.
I've been tracking this particular resonance for 4 years.
He said.
And in that time I've found a handful of loose shards. Fragments that shed off in storms and ended up in the waste layer of Keolora mostly. The east underbelly. Collected by scavengers.
He let that settle.
Collected by one particular scavenger, repeatedly over 3 years, who always seemed to find them first.
Her breathing had gone shallow. She made herself even it.
Coincidence.
She said.
The east underbelly is 6 kilometers of cable and rock. The shards from this signature appear in no predictable pattern. No one should find them consistently. No one working by sight or skill alone.
He looked at her steadily.
But you do. You find them because they call to you. You find them because your resonance responds to hers.
The warmth from the crystal pressed at the edges of her awareness like a hand against glass.
I don't know what you're talking about.
She said, but the words felt thin as she said them, like fabric she'd washed too many times.
When you hold a crystal.
Curran said.
And you feel it without relieving it. What does that feel like? Not the memory inside it. What does the feeling feel like? In your chest, your hands. Describe it.
She almost didn't answer. She'd spent years not answering this question even to herself.
Like standing next to someone.
She said finally, against her better judgment.
Someone you've known a long time. You don't need them to talk. You just know they're there.
He nodded slow.
And when you picked up this one.
Not a question. He'd seen her face when he opened the case. Myra looked at the crystal in its dark alloy cradle, the gold of it, the warmth, the very specific quality of its warmth, which was not the warmth of simple energy, but of something more stubborn than that, something that had maintained its temperature through what she sensed had been a very long dark. She'd had a dream when she was perhaps 11, maybe 12, the years before Gem got bad had blurred at the edges. A dream of a girl in a room full of light, a room where the walls themselves were lit from inside, and the girl was laughing at something off-frame that Myra couldn't see. She'd woken from that dream with the specific grief of having been near someone warm and then being outside in the cold again. She'd had that dream a dozen times. She'd never told anyone. The gold crystal sat in its case and was warm.
I'm not your instrument.
She said. Her voice had gone steady again, which cost her something.
Whatever you want to use me for, whatever this is, I'm not going to help you find it.
Curran looked at her for a long moment. The gray of his eyes had gone darker, the way the sky went when altitude climbed and the air thinned toward something inhospitable.
You've already found it.
He said quietly.
You've been finding it for years. You just haven't let yourself understand what that means.
He reached over and closed the case with a soft click. The warmth didn't disappear entirely. She could still feel its edge, faint now, like the ghost of a hand after someone had let go. He stood, brushed something off his knee, looked down at her in a way that wasn't cruel and was therefore harder to refuse.
I'll give you time to think.
He said.
It would be a shame if you chose to be afraid of the one thing that actually calls your name.
He left the way he'd come, slow and deliberate, the door closing behind him with a sound like a thought completed. The two enforcers stepped away from the walls. One of them took the case from the floor. As they carried it past her toward the door, she felt the warmth retreat, step by step, like light being pulled backward out of a room. Then the door sealed. The hum started again, quieter now, patient, finding the seams of her thoughts. But she sat with her hands open in her lap, staring at the place on the floor where the case had been, and in the center of her chest, behind the wall she'd built so carefully over years of cold climbs and harder mornings, something had cracked just enough to let the question in. A girl laughing in a room full of light, a warmth that recognized her. She pressed her palms flat against the floor, and the metal was cold under them, and she held on.